All systems nominal.
Main system activating combat mode.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Armored Core 6 fires a Rubicon. I gotta start this with a caveat. I am not the biggest Armored Core guy. If you're looking for the opinions and, general blabbing of a guy who's spent his, gaming career, really diving deep into this series, who's been there since the first one in 97, who's gone through them all and, has real live experience with FromSoft and, their mech games, I'm not that guy. I'm like so many other people, well, not quite like so many other people. A lot of people got into this game because, FromSoft and stuff like that. Latecomers and things like that. I got into this game late because I've simply been a PC gamer for most of my, life. So you can imagine a series that was primarily, up until this point, purely on console was not going to be on my radar quite as much. Simply because of lack of access or just, time to get into it and just get the consoles required to play them. The closest I've done to playing a proper FromSoft mech game was Melwolf Chaos XD when that came out on PC. And that one's basically a kind of Armored Core light on bath salts with a heaping dose of 4th of July thrown in for good measure, which is awesome, by the way. You really should play that game. It's a lot of fun. Beyond that, in terms of just, not Armor and not FromSoft, but still gameplay kind of related, Daemon X Machina is one I played a bit of, but honestly I didn't particularly like that one. I found it way too grindy, and I hated every single character as soon as they opened their goddamn mouths. And a little bit, actually, one other one that reminded me of this is Front Mission Evolved. The one that nobody liked because it wasn't a proper strategy game like the other Front Mission games. But that one also is very much Armored Core light in terms of its gameplay and, mech building and the general, operating thereof in the missions. But here we're going straight back to the actual Armored Core. As, Raven here decides to show up and wreck my fun. Ugh. Yeah, this fight, I'm not, as you can imagine, I am not playing and talking at the same time. This particular fight took me a whole bunch of tries, and if I had to try and gather my thoughts and explain what the pros and cons of this game while dealing with this asshole and his two friends, I would not be able to do it at all. So, bear with me on this. I do actually manage to beat this mission, so you'll be able to see that as I'm talking. So anyway, this game has had a lot of success already in the couple of months since it was released back in August 25th here. Which, considering that while Armored Core, the series, was FromSoft's bread and butter for the longest of times, it was still a relatively niche, series necessarily. This one has done incredibly well for them. Just on PC, the platform that I'm playing on, it's done what, more than 1.3 million copies sold? I mean, holy crap, that's pretty impressive, Not Elden Ring numbers, but then again, no one was expecting that, but still. Now, there's been a lot of translations from FromSoft's recent success into this one. And it lives up to, the hype in that regard. I mean, I've been playing this game purely mouse and keyboard, and I haven't used the controller in any way. And the controls are nice and smooth. Game's frame rate was nice and smooth on my computer. I didn't run into any particular issues with that, or graphical bugs, or anything of that sort. And I think about the only thing I did was just rebind a couple of controls for my own convenience. I have a mouse with some side buttons, and I put the shoulder weapons on those along with the Q and E as they are by standard. Also, there's the particular button combination that you use to activate certain things, like the assault armor and pulse armor. There I go. Ouch. Raven. So those ones, the particular button combination can be a little bit finicky, I found, to use in the mid-fight. But, I usually end up using terminal armor just to give myself a few extra seconds of survivability anyway, so, it's not that much of a trouble. But we'll get into that. I'm not going to go too deeply into everything, simply because so many people have already talked about the story and things like that, and dissected every little bit of, FromSoft lore that they can find in here. But one thing I think I like a lot about this game, I'm currently going through New Game Plus, having gone through my original run, Pfizer Raven ending, of course, because I enjoyed blowing things up. And then New Game Plus. This is from my New Game Plus run, what we're seeing here. One thing I really enjoy about this is that a lot of people were worried that they were going to bring in a whole bunch of Souls-like mechanics into this one because of the success that those have had. But what I like about it is they kept a lot of what made Armored Core, specifically the mission structure in a lot of ways. This is a game that in spite of, FromSoft's, tendencies towards difficulty and stuff like that, including with the Armored Core games, which are notoriously pretty difficult too, this game is pretty easy to pick up and play simply because of that mission structure. You can just, each mission is like a couple, not too long. I think at most you could spend like 15 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on the longest missions, really. That doesn't count how many times you repeat the missions if you get your ass kicked, but the individual missions aren't all that long, really. And that really helps you when you want to just, put the game down for a little bit, go do something else, and then just come back to it later and just, pick it up and pick back up where you left off. That's something I appreciate for these kinds of things. And, having the mission structure, having a good diversity of things that you do, you're always just going to be, blowing things up along the way. I mean, it's a mech game. That is pretty much what we're here for. But there's always, not only in terms of, your objectives being different, and luckily there's none of that procedural generation stuff that I tend not to like these days. Everything is nice and handcrafted. All the missions are, pretty well designed. There I go again. This is going to take a couple of tries, people. But each mission has its own particular objectives, its own particular feel to it. Some of them are just balls to the walls, just blast everything in sight. Other ones are more investigative. You're exploring certain areas. There's often, things to find as well. But there's always that tendency also to that you're in a situation that these missions require you to adapt to. And that's something that, Armored Core has always been great at. Since you're not leveling up a character, you're just, acquiring new parts that you're assembling to create your ideal mech. From there, you definitely have that feeling that, with each mission being of a particular type, of a particular, opposition, adapting yourself to that opposition is very much, the name of the game. I remember going up to the, what is it called? The mission where you're going on Xylem, the floating city, and you have to take out the ECM cloud. And then at the end, that huge helicopter, the big, filter copter from the very, very first mission comes back. And you have to deal with it. Like, during that particular mission, I'd been, during New Game Plus, I had, gone for a full missile barrage build with handheld missile launchers and the, vertical launchers I'm currently using right now on this mission here. And doing some really good with that. One thing I like about this game, in spite of the fact that the initial part and weapon selection is pretty limited compared to other Armored Core games, at least, at first, when you're starting out, just so they can get that, difficulty curve under control a bit, to have the kind of pacing that the game wants, which can be seen as a negative compared to the just sheer amount of various parts and weapons that were available at the start from other Armored Core games. But in this case, you do get a lot of, different varieties of stuff that you can use. In my case, I've been having a lot of fun using the kind of a reverse leg with nothing but missiles kind of play style. Simply just bouncing around one of those reverse chicken legs. And then just, unleashing just salvos of missiles on all targets at once. It's a lot of fun. It's pretty good against both single targets and against mass targets, especially if you're not if you're using your missiles that can have good homing on multiple targets. But then I got to that boss, and then I hadn't realized, oh wait, that thing has chaff. And all of a sudden, I was having some serious difficulties because all my weapons were now being periodically just sent off course all over the place. And basically, all I could do by the end of it, having run out of missiles, is just leap into the air and kick the damn thing over and over again until the helicopter exploded. That was a bit of a wake-up call to me for getting too complacent in a particular playstyle, which is something that you often find in this game. That while all playstyles have their pros and cons, and obviously we'll get into when I get into specific mechanics and how they influence the general meta of this game. You do end up with having certain situations where those particular pros and cons are very important to keep in mind. Like, when you get to the second major boss that you'll encounter, Balteus. And of course there's, the Juggernaut before that, but that one's, not quite as dependent on, having to really know what you're doing if you're going to go into that. And Balteus, the first time I played that one, went up against him, oh yeah, I got my ass kicked repeatedly, just because, I was always trying to keep my distance and stuff like that. And then eventually I kind of figured out putting the pressure on him and just going in there with a pulse blade and just, really, really getting in close, dealing with him that way, was a lot more effective. Also, I had twin pulse blasters, Because one thing this game does very well, and not only does it, gradually introduce new weapons and parts to you as you go along with the storyline, but also introduces concepts gradually. The missions just before that fight against Balteus at the Watchtower. First of all, you have that mission where you're going down into an abandoned area, and you have to fight those little invisible sniper mechs. And one of them at the end has the pulse armor. And then you realize, okay, this thing has a particular vulnerability to pulse weapons, which can knock that armor down pretty quickly. So there you have that introduced, and just around the same time you have those pulse blasters available now in the shop. So now you have that kind of you're encouraged to put two and two together, try to figure out, okay, these are the kinds of things that you're going to be facing. These are the kind of weapons you have available. 1 + 1 equals, you might have to change up your loadout if you want to survive what's coming next. Now, admittedly, the next time I went into that, after that, you of course have Sulla, who also has the pulse blasters. I think it's the first enemy that actually fires them at you, so that's a good introduction to those as well. And then, of course, you have Balteus. The first time I faced Balteus, it took me a couple of tries, but I did manage to take him down, and those pulse blasters were quite useful. The second time, I was using my all-missile barrage, Macross missile massacre build, and I took that thing down first try. And this was pre-patch, by the way, Balteus we're talking about here, so, I just gotta say, because that also brings to another point, the New Game Plus mode. Going through, the first to play through, I definitely did fall into the meta of, what's commonly known as the twin Sonnenbergs, twin Zimmermans, just, blasting, just, knocking things down to stagger. Because this is a bit of a con. The stagger meter, this whole concept of, not just filling up that meter until it goes red, and so you can, stun your enemy and then do massive damage in the process. On the one hand, don't have really much of a problem with the existence of this kind of a concept. I mean, I play a lot of, older MechWarrior titles, and those ones have something similar, especially when you hit something later in the face with the twin LBX-20 barrage and just knock a mech flat on his ass, which I am all for. That's a lot of fun. But it's not a primary mechanic. Here, the stagger mechanic is very much front and center, and it does kind of dictate the pacing. And it did encourage me, at least during my initial playthrough, to kind of forget about energy weapons a lot, the lasers and plasma weapons, and stick particularly to ballistics and missiles, simply because they had the highest stagger. And definitely when I got to the Sea Spider boss, yeah, I went for full shotguns and shoulder-mounted grenade launchers, of course. Also threw up around the hover legs so I could keep my elevation a lot. There's a reason why these kinds of metas kind of appear over time, rather quickly. But admittedly, once I got into New Game Plus and started, having a bit more of a variety of parts and kind of more play around with what I want, that's when I started experimenting a lot more. And I think that's one of the advantages of having, the ability to go back to those earlier missions, and with, not only new mission objectives as there are in New Game Plus, and of course change missions like this one. You didn't have to deal with King and Chartreuse previously when you had to deal with Raven. But you also end up with the ability to experiment a bit more, to try out different things with missions that you've already familiarized yourself with, and with gameplay mechanics that you're familiar with. You now know a bit more how you're supposed to play this game in order to have any degree of success with it. Which, obviously, there's always a learning curve with these games, and, some people are just never going to be able to, catch up with it. It's not a game for everybody, but it's a game that anybody can try out. That's, at least a good point in its favor. And it is a bit more forgiving in many ways from other Armored Core games. I mean, aside from the, repair kits and checkpoints and stuff like that, one thing that is very different, I found, the costs factor. The repairs and ammo costs that, deduct from your mission rewards at the end of each successful mission. Well, one, there's the fact that they don't deduct from you if you lose the mission, which, at this point in my playthrough would have bankrupted me fairly quickly, because goddamn, look how many times this isn't even the first time I played this mission, by the way. Before I recorded this footage, I tried it a whole bunch of times. I just, this... One thing for me in FromSoft games, I gotta be in a particular mindset to be able to play them. Any kind of really, particularly challenging game, I need to be in the... You can't play this game while you're tired. That's all I'm saying. At least not for me. I need to be, keep my wits about me, especially for something that moves this fast. And one thing For a guy who like me, who's mostly a mech warrior guy, yeah, this game is way faster paced than anything that that particular franchise has put out. Like, holy crap! I mean, even though running around with a locust isn't this fast. Ooh, and there we go, finally. Yeah, that's only what 15 minutes and a half it took me in the current footage. Yeah. So, like I said, the missions aren't very long. It's just, some of them are kind of tough, so you may have to do them over and over again. But even the ones that are longer, because of those checkpoints, you're never really wasting all that much time. And the fact that you can, when you die, go back to your assembly and, change up your parts and stuff like that, also not a bad thing. So, yeah, repair costs there, we saw not exactly much. Ooh, Mind Alpha. Not exactly much. I never really took into account, when choosing my weapons, the cost of the ammunition and the cost of the repairs, or any of that, really, when I was, selecting my mech components. That was something that was fairly important in prior Armored Core games. But here, it's there, but you can never really go bankrupt. You can always go back to replay earlier missions in order to build up some more money. There's the arena, of course, which also gives you the OS chips you need to unlock certain things. So, yeah, Armored Core 6 is definitely far more forgiving, especially compared to other ones, like, what I've heard of something like Last Raven or something like that, which are notorious, even for a guy who hasn't played as much Armored Core. I know that one has a reputation for being hard as hell. So, there is that. It definitely is. I guess the difficulty is different in that regard. It's a bit more forgiving in certain ways, and in other ways, the fact that they have those checkpoints and those, repair kits has allowed them to make certain missions way more difficult in other ways, especially when you get to like the larger bosses and stuff like that you end up facing, which have their own ways of doing things, but can be, pretty damn powerful as well. And overall, I think ultimately that, just looking here at as I check out that new part I got, there's still enough crunch under the hood there, even with certain things missing, like, there's no weapon arms, and there's a whole bunch of internal components and stuff that aren't there. You no longer have to have a dedicated parts to even have a radar, much less, have a good one, like, were in previous ones. I mean, that is something I would like to see going forward, having other things. Like, I would love to have some kind of anti-missile system you can install on your mech. That'd be kind of cool, considering, you have so many things that love spamming missiles at you. I mean, Voltaire-Slin, among others. One other thing I love also, and, this is going back to the other games that I played there before this that reminded me of Armored Core, and especially Daemon X Machina in that regard, is that the story structure and the characters are done with just enough depth and detail to make them work without just, going overboard into, like super long cutscenes with all these characters talking, and especially none of the characters annoyed me at all. That is something I like quite a bit. All these characters are voices in briefings and over your comms, but that, just the personality of the voice actors put into their voice work, combined with the mechs that they operate and the emblems they use to describe themselves, it's enough to really paint a good picture of these characters and to give them enough depth to make you give a damn about them. I especially like yeah, obviously there's Rusty. I also like, Air and Walter and Carla. I love Michigan, the big, drill sergeant character kind of guy. He's just great fun. I mean, just listening, he reminds me of some guys I knew in the Army. It's just like, literally, yeah, I've known guys like that. And man, he's always a hoot to listen to. Too bad about me having to blow him up at that one point, but, yeah, money's money, right? We're all mercenaries here, so that gotta count for something. And I do like the fact, all these different, parts, especially the leg parts, which really determine your kind of play style. You've got your bipeds, which are, jack of all trades. The ones I use most of, the reverse knee design, which allow you to really bounce around, just jump without using your boosters too much, which really helps you save on energy and keep you mobile and dodgy and stuff like that. Also makes for good quick boosts. And of course, you have your quad hover legs, which are really useful in certain areas. And, of course, the tank treads, which, just... I mean, holy crap. Those things, when I decided to test those out for a little bit, man, those things can do a lot of, take a lot of hits and are pretty good for dealing damage. They definitely operate differently from the other ones, so you gotta get used to that, but It's more of a ground game, but with a little bit of air power too. So it's definitely different from the other ones, and that's something that's really good. There is a play style for anybody who wants to, try their hand at this game. There's probably some combination of parts that you can put together that will sing for your particular way of playing, which is, always nice for these kinds of games, especially ones that, really emphasize the customizability of your mechs, as opposed to other ones which are, not quite as customizable. I mean, obviously, not every mech game allows you to rip the thing down to limb from limb and rebuild it from scratch, Although that does make me wish that Heavy Gear 1 got a proper remaster. Well, a man can dream. Aside from that, I mean, the sheer scale of everything. I mean, these mechs are, what? I mean, an armor core is about 10 to 13 meters tall, I think, on average. I'd have to recheck again. And you can really tell, compared to more, like, human scale stuff, like, forklifts and little vehicles and stuff like that. But then you see the stuff you're operating in, just the sheer size of these mega structures that you're exploring and destroying and stuff. It's hard to make being in a giant killer robot make you feel small, and this game really does actually do that very well. Here's my typical missile barrage. Yeah, this thing, this particular this particular build has really gotten me through quite a few missions. Just being able to just spread those shots around, target enemies, and fire and forget as you're bouncing around really, really comes in handy. And it's a lot of fun because, let's face it, I do enjoy firing missiles at everything. I'm not gonna lie, it is just boom. Nothing quite like good member explosions. Reminds me, I gotta rewatch Macross one of these days. But yeah, Armored Core 6. I think that if you want to get into Armored Core, this is probably one of the easiest ones to do so. Obviously, it doesn't play quite the same way as previous Armored Core games. Where, I mean, for one thing, you can pretty much leave your boosters on and just skid around all over the place without ever having to walk, as opposed to things like all the Armored Cores before 4, if I'm not mistaken, didn't really have that. And, whoop, yeah, here I go. And... Can I make it? Can I make it? Almost. I'm not going to make it, by the way. But yeah, also there that Assault Boost, which is basically the overboost from Armored Core 4 and such. Basically, this game has a lot in common with all the previous ones, but also taking into account the stuff that FromSoft learned from making all their different other games, the Souls ones and such, and Sekiro and Bloodborne and all those other games that have really gotten them, put them really, really smack dab on the map these days. But it's always nice to see that, we saw the reaction when this game was announced back in the day. And yeah, it's good to see them come back to this after so much time, because it shows that, A, they haven't forgot where they came from. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at all those little mooks getting blown up. That is beautiful. It shows they haven't forgotten where they came from, and they certainly haven't forgotten how to make a good mech game. I mean, obviously, there are going to be people who prefer the older style of Armored Core, and, that's perfectly fine. I mean, it makes perfect sense, especially if, they grew up with those ones. For me, as someone who doesn't have that experience with the previous ones, I'm liking a lot of what I'm seeing. I wouldn't mind seeing more of what made those... Oop, missed. Come on, kick. Missed. Damn it. There we go. It can be a little bit hard to aim with those things sometimes. But yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing more of what made those older Armored Cores tick brought back into any future ones like this. Like, bring back the ability to go bankrupt and stuff like that. Having those, ammo and repair costs actually have some teeth. Actually having missions that you can only do the one time and that get taken off the roster if you fail them. That'd be something. I mean, it probably wouldn't make everybody happy, but, that is something to take into account. That was part of the older Armored Core games. But, all the things that this game has going for it, the mission structure, the story being told through those briefings and communications in missions, stuff like that, the assembly of your own perfect idealized weapon of mass mech destruction, and the smoothness of the controls. This is probably one of the smoothest PC ports that I've played in quite some time. I mean, I didn't have any problems, getting my hands around the controls, especially once I just, did, as I said, a little bit of rebinding for the mouse controls there. Well, yeah, I can just, whether it's doing regular aiming or that hard lock, which is generally what you want to do for single targets, which is pretty handy if you don't want to always keep them in view, but not always. Depending on the speed of the target, that's not always going to be your best bet. Yeah, it helps to be flexible, which is what you can say about every aspect of this particular game. It helps to be flexible. Don't always focus on a single mech build. Change things up sometimes. Change your approach. Change your tactics. Change everything. Change your allegiance. Because let's face it, especially in New Game Plus, once you get into there's a couple of times where you can switch sides mid-mission, which generally is going to be a lot harder than if you went with the original mission path, but the rewards can be interesting, especially when they unlock further missions. That's one thing I like, too, the way that the New Game Plus isn't just replaying the same game with all the stuff that you've acquired since then. There are changes, there are different things that you can explore and decide to do along the way now that you've played through the initial and see different perspectives now. And the fact there's multiple endings. Yeah, this is a game that I recommend trying out for those who are a fan of this kind of faster paced mech combat. If you're the kind of person who really prefers the more tanky approach of something like Mech Warrior, or if you're more into the whole mech strategy genre, like the front missions or Battletech, the Harebrained Schemes game and stuff like that, well, this one might not be your cup of tea. It's definitely in a different genre to those ones, those kinds of mech sims. But if you enjoy what you're seeing, flamethrower. If you enjoy what you're seeing from this kind of gameplay, and if you're interested, if you're like me and haven't gotten into this series previously, this is a good starting point. And if you have played the other games in the series and want to give this one a try, I think there's a lot for you to like there. It's definitely not going to be exactly the same as what was previously, but I think there's enough there that I think you will enjoy it. Hopefully. Your mileage is always going to vary as usual, but I will say this, I definitely did enjoy this game, and I'm continuing to play it now, and yeah, this is a damn fine entry into this series. For a series that's often reimagines itself with every numbered entry, always changing things up, one, if you don't like this, chances are it's going to change up enough in the next entry that you will start enjoying it more, maybe. And who knows, maybe they'll start introducing things from prior entries that you miss, and that we'll end up seeing more of. So that'd be interesting. I like to see certain aspects of the older Armored Core games that get brought back. But in the meantime, this has been Zero Sum. This has been Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. And I will see you next time. I'm ejecting. Bye-bye.
All primary objectives complete. Mission successful.